Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis, starting with Nun Zayin Amud Aleph at the new Mishnah. Until now we're talking about various configurations of cities, and depending on its configuration we determine where is its border to then measure 2,000 amos for Erev Techumin. Our Mishnah now discusses an additional aspect to teach us where we actually measure the 2,000 amos from. Says the Mishnah, Noisnin karpef li'ir divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir teaches us that in addition to the actual border of the city, the karpef, which is normally an area that is considered to be something that's non-residential, and you usually use it to store your wood and other such things. So the karpef, which is outside of the city itself, only from after the karpef do we measure 2,000 amos. What is the measurement of a karpef? Karpef is 70 2/3 amos. So we go 70 2/3 amos by 70 2/3 amos. We're talking about an area of 5,000 square amos. Only from outside the 5,000 square amos of the city do we begin counting then the techum of 2,000 amos. V'chachamim omrim lo amru karpef elo bein shtei ayoros. The Chacham say that we have a karpef only when it's between two cities. Im yesh lezu shivim amo v'shirayim ulezu shivim amo v'shirayim, then oise karpef eshteim lios echot. If we have between the two cities the distance of two sides of a karpef, that means 141 1/3 amos between these two cities, then it will indeed combine the two cities to be really one city. And therefore, if you have a person who is residing in city A and he wants to then walk through to get to city B and then walk out city B, he only begins the 2,000 amos from outside of city B. The Mishnah continues, V'chein gimel kefarim ha-meshuloshim. The mashmos of the Mishnah is that if you have three kfarim, three villages that are in line with each other, village A, B, and C. Im yesh bein shnayim hachitzoinim meya ve'arboim ve'achas v'shlish. If you have between the outer cities A and C to be no more than 141 1/3 amos, the size of two karpef, asa emtzoi eshloishtem lios echad. Then the middle one will make those to be all one city. And again, if you go from city A and you walk through to city B, walk through to city C, and then out city C, you'll only count your 2,000 amos when you leave city C. Now I say this is the mashmos of the reading of the Mishnah. The Gemara will explain that the reading of the Mishnah indeed is perhaps different than the way we explained it now. Ask the Gemara right away, Menohani Mili, from where do we know that indeed we don't count 2,000 amos from the city limits, but rather we have an additional area of a karpef, and only after that do we then measure the 2,000 amos? Omar Rove, the Omar Kro, Mikir Ha'ir Vachutza. We brought this post in the previous Amud. There, in regards to the Arei Levin, the pasuk says a migrash, the open area, is going to be mikir ha'ir v'chutza, from the wall of the city and outside. So once it says mikir ha'ir, from the wall of the city, we already know it means from the outside. That means v'chutza seems to be a superfluous word. To which the Gemara explains, Amr Torah tein chutza v'achar madoid. That means first give an outer area and then count. So we have the outer area, this being the karpef. The Gemara now quotes the Mishnah, V'chachamim oimrim lo amru karpef ela bein shtei ayoros. Only when you have a karpef between two ayoros, there's a difference of opinion. What is the kavana of the chachamim here? Does it mean to say the area of one karpef between the two cities? Or does it mean a karpef for one city and another karpef for the other city, the area of two karpef between the two cities? Says the Gemara, Itmar, Rav Huna Omar, Noisnin karpef lezu v'karpef lezu. Rav Huna is of the opinion that it's indeed two karpef between the two cities, a total of 141 1/3 amos. Chia Barav Omar Karpef Echad L'Shtem. Chia Barav says no, we're talking about only one karpef between the two cities. What is that? 70 and 2/3 amos. Tnan, the Gemara now brings the Mishnah. V'chachamim oimrim loy oimru karpef ela bein beis ayaros. Here it states that the word karpef, which is singular used, that is going to be between two ayaros. Tiyufta de Rav Huna, a refutation of Rav Huna. So clearly, from the Mishnah's words, the indication is such that we're talking about one karpef between the two cities, and not like Rav Huna had stated, we're talking about two karpef. Omar lach Rav Huna, my karpef, what's the kavanah when it says karpef? It means taras karpef, the institution of a karpef. That's what it means. Therefore, when the Chachamim said their words, they said the following: V'amru Chachamim, Chachamim omrim loy omru karpef ela bein shtei ayaros. The taras karpef is talking about between two ayaros, but not the karpef echa, not one karpef. Ulo oilam karpef lezu, karpef lezu. But the kavanah is that it's a distance of two karpef, one karpef for this city and one karpef for the other city. Hachanam mistaber, the Gemara actually says this is mistaber, like Rav Huna is saying that there's two karpef in between the two cities from the hemshech of the Mishnah. Midiktani seifa, from the fact that it says in the seifa, im yesh lezu ayin amo v'shirayim ulezu ayin amo v'shirayim oise karpef lishteyem lios echad. Here it says explicitly that you'll have two karpef in between the two cities. One karpef for this city and one karpef for the other city. Clearly like Rav Huna. Shma mina. To which the Maragora asks now, Leima tiyavi tiyufta, the Chia Barav. So let's say this is a refutation now on Chia Barav, who says there's only one karpef in between the two cities. Or Marlach Chia Barav, on top of Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Homani Rabbi Meir Hi. This statement is made by the Tanakama Rabbi Meir. Ask the Gemara, if so, Rabbi Meir he hotani le reisha. He already taught that a karpef is given to the city in the reisha. Noistin karpef le'ir div Rabbi Meir. You give a karpef to the city according to Rabbi Meir. So therefore you have two cities. So certainly you'll then give a karpef to each one. So why did we need Rabbi Meir to then repeat this teaching again? Says the Gemara Tzricha, we need both statements. Because if I only had the first statement that you give a karpef to one city, I might think Hava mina chad lechad v'chad l'tarti, that there's no distinction between one and two cities. I give a karpef to one city, I give a karpef to two cities. Kamash malan, that we give a karpef to one city and a second karpef to another city. Kamashman de tarti trei yahavinon eluhu. To two karpef I give to two cities. V'yashmin hoch, if I only taught the latter statement that you give two karpef to the two cities, I would say mishum de dachika tashmishtoihu. Because there, when you have two cities, then they're having the space that is in between the two of them. So therefore, in order to then connect and combine that space, which is 141 and 1/3 amos, then we give them both, each one a karpef. Aval hasam de loy dechika tashmishtaihu emoloi. But when it comes to one city, there's not a dechika tashmishtaihu, and therefore we might think not to even give one karpef. We might just measure from the border of the city. Emoloi. Tzricha, and therefore we need both statements of Rabbi Meir. The Gemara now wants to prove, V'tnan, it says in the Mishnah in the Seifa, V'chein shloisha kfarim ha-mishuloshim. There are three cities that are mishuloshim. The Gemara understands the pshutoi of the words of the Mishnah, that there are three cities, A, B, and C, that are lined up across from each other in one line. Im yesh bein shnayim hachitzoinim meya the Mishnah reads that if you have these three cities, A, B, and C, and you have between the outer cities a distance of 141 and 1/3 amma, the middle one then will make it so that it's combining them to be one city. Ask the Gemara, Taimo diika emtsoi, haleka emtsoi loi. That the only reason why this is so, that it becomes combined to be one city, is because of the middle city between A and C. City B in between them makes it so that you have then only one karpef, one distance of 70 and 2/3 amma. Tiyufta de Rav Huna, the Gemara is using this as a refutation against Rav Huna that says there are two karpef distance between the two cities. Omar loch Rav Huna says to you, Ha itmar Allah, it was taught on this Mishnah the following, to explain the Mishnah, that it's not read kipshutoi. Omar Rav Idi, Omar V'chanina, Loi mishalshim mamish elaroyin kol she'ilu metil emtsoi beineim v'yu mishuloshim. It doesn't mean that the three cities are in line, in a straight line. No, it means there's city A and city C, and city B is jutted out. In other words, like a segel, where you have two cities and then underneath is one. So then we say that if you can bring, we can look at it as if we bring that middle city to be in between the other two cities, so that it will be a straight line. Then we say, indeed, that it's going to be combined as one city, providing that you'll have 141 and 1/3 amma between city A and B, and city B and C. Says the Gemara, Lo mishuloshim mamish. It doesn't mean that it's actually all three cities in one line. Ella royin. We view it, we look at it as if kol she'ilu metil emtsoi beinehem v'yu mishuloshim. By then putting that jutted out city B in between city A and C. Ve'ein bein zeh lezeh ella kuf mem amo va'achas v'shlish osa emtsoi eshloishim lios echad. And the meaning over here does not mean the distance between the two outer cities is 141 and 1/3 amma. No. The kavana over here is that there's 141 and 1/3 amma between city A and city B, and between city B and city C. Omar le Rava la Abaye. Rava asked Abaye, Kama yehe bein chitzin le'emtsoi. How much is between the chitzoin and the middle? In other words, the space in between, when we have that city that's jetted out, how far can that city A be from city B when it's jetted out? And how far from city B to city C when it's jetted out? How far is that distance that then we would say afterwards that we'll view city B to be in between city A and city C? Or Malay Alpayim Ammo, the distance of 2,000 Ammo, because then a person could walk between city A and city B and city B and city C, because then he's not going beyond the Techum. He asks, how could that be, Abaye? At hu de amris, kavase de rabbe bre de rabbe ba Rav Huna mistabra. You said earlier on in the sugya above, on daf nun hey amid beis, there the Gemara was talking about when they had a configuration of homes, of houses, in the configuration of a bow. And since that was a configuration of a bow, there the Gemara said, how far can the middle of the bow be to the bowstring, that we would then allow there to be an imaginary bowstring to be closed and then count the Techum from there. The Omar, you said Yoiser Ma'al Payim Ammo. You said even more than 2,000 amos. There was an opinion that said 2,000 amos, but you sided with the opinion that was even beyond 2,000 amos. So how can you say over here that it's only 2,000 amos? Hachi Hashti says, is this a comparison? Hasam ika batim, hachaleka batim. Over there, in the case of the bow, the configuration of the houses that are in a bow shaped, there are houses where a person can go ahead and go from the head of the bow, and he can walk via the houses around the bow to the all the way to the bowstring, to the head of the bow. So therefore, since there are batim even beyond 2,000 amos, but over here in our situation there's no batim, so therefore it's limited to 2,000 amos between the outer and the inner one, between A and Kfar B, and from Kfar B to Kfar C. How far is the distance between the outer Kfar and the other outer Kfar? Kfar A and Kfar C. Kami Yehi, Rava says, Abai says back to Rava, my nafka loch mina. What the difference would be? Kol she'ilu machnis and soy beineim ve'ein bein ze leze elamea va'arbim va'achat v'shlish. We already said, so long as you have 141 and 1/3 amos between A and B, and between B and C, that would be then satisfactory. So it doesn't make a difference how far between A and C. In other words, it can be that Kfar B is a very big city, and therefore it can be so large, doesn't make a difference to us, providing that A and B are only 141 and 1/3 amma apart. And so too between B and C. Vafilu asks Rava to Abai, Dalet alofim amma, even if it's going to be 4,000 amos. Omar Le'in. Abai says yes. Rav Huna ir ha'asuyek bekeshes. A city again with a configuration of a keshes. We have the homes that are around like a bow, in the shape of a bow. Im yesh bein beis roisheho. Pochos me'arbas alofim amma moididin. Lo mina ma'ayeser. Rav Huna says, if there's a space between the heads of the bows, where we say the imaginary bowstring would be, if it's going to be up until 4,000 amos, then we measure it and use it as a enclosed area, and then determine that the tchum is going to be from there on. V'im la moidin lo mina keshes. But if not, then we measure only from the keshes itself. So therefore, how can you say even beyond 4,000 amos? Abaye answers, Abaye amar le hasam leka lememer mali. Over there, in the case of the bow, there we can't say that you fill it out with houses. Hacha ika lememer mali. But over here you could say you fill it up. In other words, over there, when it comes to the bow, since the configuration of the house is in such a way is like a bow, so then what we want to do is we want to say filling in the houses, the empty space that is in between. When you make the imaginary bowstring, we want to then fill in those houses and then make the techum from the bowstring, the imaginary bowstring. But over there, if we're going to then say that's beyond 4,000 amos between the head of the bows, then that's going to be a problem. We won't be able to then go ahead and, so to speak, fill in the houses. Why? Since it's up to 4,000 amos, less than 4,000 amos makes it so that the two boundaries of less than 2,000 amos will then overlap with each other. But if it's going to be beyond 4,000 amos, so then you're going to really count the techum only from, you're going to want it, what you're proposing to do is to count the techum from an enclosed area. That you can't do. You want to move the techum. Whereas over here, in this case, we're not moving techum. We're not going to change the techum whatsoever. We're just going to then combine the three kfarim together to make it so that there's going to be one kfar. But in terms of changing the techum, where we begin counting the 2,000 amos itself, that's going to remain at the border of the kfar. So again, over there by the bow, there we're not enabled to then fill in the empty space with houses if it's going to be beyond 4,000 amos from one head of the bow to the other head of the bow. But over here, in our situation, we don't need to go ahead and fill in. We could go ahead and do so. We don't need to then change the border, so we can fill it in, so to speak, to make it so it's one city and count the techum in its realistic place, instead of trying to change the techum, which we're trying to do over there. Omar lei Rav Safra le Rav. Now we go back to what we said before. We said that in regards to then two cities that have area in between them, the most lenient opinion is the opinion that we saw of 141 and 1/3 amma in between. In other words, space of two karpef. Ask Rav Safra to Rava, Harei b'nei akistafoin the mashchinin lehu techumei mehai gisa the ardashir ubnei ardashir mashchinan lehu techuma mehai gisa the akistafoin. We have two cities that measure their borders from one side to the next, and in between is a large area. Ha'ika diglas the mafsika yesememea ve'arbaim ve'ach v'shlish. In between is the Tigris River, and there's more than 141 and 1/3 amma in between these two cities. So how can we go ahead and make it so that it's a combined city? Hooray! There's beyond two karpef in between the Tigris River. Answers the Gemara explains Rava to Rav Safra Nofik Achvei Lei. He went and he showed him Hanoch Atmahosa Dishura. There are sections of the walls that were the extension of the cities themselves that now are ruined but are inside of the Tigris River. The Mivloi Bediglas Be'ayin Amma V'Shirayim. They are inside of the river, and they are only 70 and 1/3 and 2/3 amos apart. So therefore, there's not going to be a space that's going to be beyond 141 and 1/3 amma like we thought, and therefore they can combine to be indeed one city.